The Australian soldier pressed sharpened bamboo into the jungle floor, while his teammates watched with barely concealed contempt. One whispered the question that echoed through the night. What's the Boy Scout building? A treehouse? By dawn, 3 Viet Cong bodies would answer that question, and the phantom unit that never left traces would learn sometimes the simplest weapons cut deepest. Phuoc Tuy Province, South Vietnam, 1967. The kind of darkness that exists only under triple canopy jungle. The kind where your eyes never adjust because there's nothing to adjust to. Where the humidity sits on your skin like a second uniform. Where every sound gets amplified by adrenaline and fear, until you can't tell the difference between a falling leaf and a footstep. The CSR patrol sat in defensive positions. 4 men, spaced at intervals that allowed mutual support without clustering. Each one invisible to the others despite being only meters apart. That's what 3 days in the bush does. It teaches you to become part of the environment, to breathe with the jungle instead of against it, to move like water instead of forcing your way through. They were 72 hours into a reconnaissance mission. Deep penetration, no support, no quick reaction force, no extraction unless things went catastrophically wrong. This was CSR doctrine. Small teams, long duration. Observe and report. Become the ghosts the Viet Cong whispered about in their base camps. The phantoms of the jungle who appeared from nowhere and vanished before you could aim. But tonight, one member of the patrol was doing something that contradicted everything the unit stood for. Something that made the veterans question whether selection standards had dropped. Something primitive, amateur, almost insulting in its simplicity. He was building traps. The young soldier they'd started calling Scout worked near the perimeter. His movements economical, practiced. The kind of efficiency that comes from doing something so many times it becomes muscle memory. He had bamboo stakes arranged beside him, each one roughly 18 inches long, each one sharpened at both ends to needle points that could punch through flesh and bone with minimal resistance. The sound of his knife against bamboo carried just far enough to reach the other operators. A soft scraping, methodical, persistent. In the suffocating silence of a jungle night, it might as well have been a chainsaw. The senior operator, call sign Dingo, leaned toward the patrol leader, his whisper barely audible even at close range. What's the kid doing? Building a campfire ring, maybe some s'mores? The patrol leader, a sergeant with 4 tours and a face that looked like the jungle had been using it for target practice, didn't respond immediately. He watched Scout work, watched the careful angle measurements, the precise placement, the attention to detail that separated competent soldiers from dead ones. But still, traps. In a SASR patrol, it violated everything they'd built their reputation on. Scout heard them. Of course he heard them. Sound carried both ways, but he ignored the whispers. Ignored the barely concealed contempt. He'd heard worse 2 days ago during the insertion brief when he'd first suggested this. The patrol leader had nearly laughed him out of the operations tent. Actually laughed. Not the friendly kind. The kind that asks if you're stupid or just suicidal. Because SASR didn't do static defenses. Period. They weren't infantry, weren't engineers, weren't the kind of unit that dug in and waited for the enemy to come to them. They were reconnaissance, intelligence gathering, the eyes and ears that saw what satellites couldn't and reported what signals intelligence missed. They were mobility, flexibility, the ability to observe enemy positions and disappear before anyone knew they'd been there. The Viet Cong had given them a name, Phantoms, not because the Australians were scary, but because they were impossible to pin down. You'd find signs they'd been somewhere, boot prints, disturbed vegetation, maybe a fighting position that showed professional construction. But the Australians themselves, gone, vanished, like they'd never existed. That reputation saved lives, made the enemy nervous, made them waste resources trying to hunt units that refused to be found. And now Scout wanted to throw it away for some primitive trap system that belonged in a different war, a different century. But the patrol leader had given permission anyway, not because he believed in it, not because tactical doctrine supported it, but because they were spending the night in this position regardless. And if the kid wanted to waste his energy on a project that wouldn't matter, fine. It wouldn't hurt anything, wouldn't help, just wouldn't hurt. Scout had made his case 3 hours earlier, right after they'd established the defensive perimeter, and begun the slow process of settling into the jungle's rhythm. He'd been on watch, scanning their surroundings with eyes that had learned to see patterns instead of details, and he'd found something that made his stomach tighten. Trail signs, fresh ones, within 200 meters of their position, boot prints in soft earth beside a stream, the edges still sharp, not degraded by weather, made within the last 6 hours. Size and spacing indicated adults, moving tactically. Weight distribution suggested they were carrying equipment, probably weapons, definitely not civilians. Broken branches at chest height, snapped outward. The break patterns showed someone had pushed through quickly, hadn't bothered with proper noise discipline. That meant either they were careless or they felt safe. In this area, feeling safe meant you controlled the territory. Disturbed leaf litter along a natural corridor between two rock formations. The kind of route any experienced soldier would use because it offered concealment and multiple exit options. Someone had moved through recently, multiple someones based on the width of disturbance. Scout had reported it immediately, showed the patrol leader, walked him through the analysis. The conclusion was unavoidable. A VC patrol had operated in this area recently, and based on the movement patterns, they weren't just passing through, they were searching, hunting. They might pick up our signs, Scout had said quietly. If they're competent, and we know they are, they'll identify that a team's in the area, and then they'll come looking. The patrol leader had nodded, accepted the analysis, adjusted their defense plan accordingly, repositioned the claymore mines, established clear fields of fire, made sure every operator knew the likely approach routes and had sectors assigned. Standard procedure, professional, effective. Then Scout had made his suggestion. I want to set traps along the approach routes. The silence that followed felt heavier than the humidity. Dingo had broken it first. Traps? Like what? Deadfalls? Rope snares? Maybe a tiger pit? The sarcasm landed like a physical blow. Scout had held his ground, pulled out a piece of bamboo he'd cut earlier, held it up in the fading light. Like what the VC use against us, every single day. Bamboo stakes, punji traps. Simple, effective. And they work because nobody expects them anymore. The patrol leader had studied the bamboo, studied Scout, his expression unreadable in the twilight. We're not them. We don't invite contact. We avoid it. Our job is reconnaissance, not combat. We watch. We report. We disappear before they know we existed. I understand that, Sergeant. But what if they find us anyway? What if we can't avoid contact this time? Then we fight and extract, fast and violent. That's the doctrine. And if there are more of them than us? If they pin us down before we can move? That question had bought Scout his permission. Reluctant, conditional, wrapped in skepticism so thick you could taste it. But permission nonetheless. Fine. Set your traps. But you do it alone. Don't waste anyone else's time. And when nothing happens, we're not discussing this again. Clear? Clear, Sergeant. Now Scout worked in the darkness his eyes had finally adjusted to, not seeing details, just shapes and shadows, and the memory of terrain he'd studied before the sun disappeared. He'd scouted the approaches during twilight, identified 3 natural corridors anyone moving tactically would use, routes that offered concealment, routes that avoided open areas and noise hazards, routes that a professional soldier would choose instinctively. That's where he placed his traps. The first cluster went along a depression between 2 fallen logs, the kind of low route that lets you stay below sight lines while moving. Scout dug shallow pits, just deep enough that a boot would sink 4 inches when weight came down. At the bottom of each pit, he positioned bamboo stakes, angled at 45 degrees, pointing toward the direction of approach. When someone stepped into the pit, their momentum would drive their leg down onto the stake. Physics would do the rest. He sharpened each stake to a point that could split paper, tested the angles with his hand, made sure the give in the ground would allow proper penetration, covered everything with leaf litter and small branches, made it look untouched, natural, just another section of jungle floor that had been there for years. The second cluster went beside a large tree with exposed roots, the kind of landmark you use for navigation at night, the kind of feature you move toward because it's identifiable even in darkness. Scout positioned stakes between the roots, in shadows so deep that even moonlight wouldn't penetrate, hidden in negative space, invisible until you stepped wrong. The third cluster was the most sophisticated, a natural choke point where terrain forced anyone moving through to pass within a 2-meter corridor. Rocks on one side, dense vegetation on the other. Only one path that didn't make noise. Scout lined that path with stakes positioned at angles that caught legs, feet, and anyone who stumbled after the first person got hit. A chain reaction trap, one casualty creating more casualties. He used vines for tripwires, natural ones already hanging, just repositioned slightly, tensioned carefully, connected to stakes that would swing or thrust when triggered. Nothing manufactured, nothing that looked out of place. Just the jungle arranged with lethal intent. The whole setup took him 90 minutes. 90 minutes of work the other operators spent preparing conventional defenses, positioning claymore mines with proper overlapping kill zones, establishing sectors of fire that covered all approaches, checking ranges, marking landmarks they could use for reference in darkness, professional infantry work, modern warfare adapted to jungle conditions, while Scout played with sticks. Dingo watched him finish the last trap, shook his head slowly, the gesture visible even in darkness because the contempt behind it had weight. You know what this reminds me of? Kids at summer camp building forts. Next you'll be making friendship bracelets. The third operator, call sign Blue, laughed quietly. At least he's keeping busy. Better than sitting here thinking about all the ways we can die. He's thinking about ways we can die, Dingo countered. He's just inventing creative ones. Wait till Charlie walks right past those sticks and shoots us while we're wondering why the camping project didn't work. Scout returned to his position, settled in, checked his rifle for the 100th time, made sure magazines were positioned for quick access, went through the mental checklist every operator runs before darkness makes movement nearly impossible, and questioned everything he'd just done. Maybe the veterans were right. Maybe this was stupid. Amateur hour in a professional war. He'd learned these techniques before the army, before selection, before he understood that modern warfare had evolved past sharpened sticks and holes in the ground, back when survival training meant actually surviving in the bush for weeks with minimal equipment, when you had to build shelter and find food and protect yourself with whatever materials nature provided. Those skills had impressed the recruiters, made him stand out during selection, showed he could adapt and improvise and think creatively under pressure. But selection wasn't combat, training wasn't warfare, and the gap between impressing instructors and staying alive against an enemy that had been fighting in this jungle since before he was born felt wider than the ocean he'd crossed to get here. The hours dragged. Time loses meaning in jungle darkness. You can't check your watch because the luminous dial might give away your position. You can't move because noise discipline is survival. You just sit and wait, and try to keep your mind from inventing threats in every shadow. The patrol maintained radio silence, hand signals only when absolutely necessary. No movement except for slow head turns to scan assigned sectors. Breathing controlled to shallow sips that didn't create sound. This was SASR discipline, the kind that separated elite units from everyone else. The ability to remain absolutely still for hours while every instinct screams at you to move, to do something. To take action instead of waiting passively for whatever comes. The jungle amplified everything. Every insect chirp, every leaf settling, every branch creaking under thermal contraction as night cooled the air. Your brain processes thousands of sounds per minute, filters them, categorizes them, natural or threat, normal or danger, animal or human. Experienced operators could tell the difference. Could hear a human footstep at 50 meters and distinguish it from an animal. Could identify equipment sounds, weapon slings, canteen slosh, the metallic click of a safety being released. Those sounds carried meanings, stories, intentions. Scout listened, filtered, cataloged. His sector covered the approach where he'd placed the first trap cluster, the depression between the logs. He watched it, stared at shadows until his eyes hurt. Saw nothing, heard nothing beyond the normal jungle symphony. 0 to 30 hours. Based on the position of stars visible through gaps in the canopy. Roughly, the witching hour, the time when exhaustion hits hardest, when guard shifts in normal units would be rotating, when alertness drops because the human body demands sleep. SASR trained for this, taught operators to manage fatigue, to stay alert through sheer discipline, and the understanding that a moment of inattention meant death. Not might mean death, meant it, guaranteed. In this environment, against this enemy, you didn't get warnings. You didn't get second chances. Dingo's hand came up. Slow movement. Deliberate. The freeze signal. Everyone caught it instantly. Held whatever position they were in. Stopped breathing for a count of 3 while ears strained for whatever had triggered the alert. There. 80 meters out. Maybe 90. Distance was hard to judge in darkness without visual reference. But definitely close. Too close. Movement, not animal. Animals move in patterns, start and stop, react to sounds, change direction unpredictably. This was linear, purposeful. Multiple contacts moving in formation. Humans, armed, tactical. The Viet Cong were good. Better than most Western armies wanted to admit. They moved through jungle darkness like they'd been born in it, which many had. This was their country, their terrain, their war. They knew every trail, every landmark, every sound that belonged and every sound that didn't, and they were moving toward the SAR position. Scout felt his heart rate spike, felt adrenaline dump into his bloodstream, felt every sense sharpened to painful clarity. His hands tightened on his rifle, finger indexed along the receiver, not on the trigger yet. Discipline even in crisis. You don't touch the trigger until you've identified a target and made the decision to fire. The movement continued. Closer. 60 meters now. Maybe less. Multiple contacts. At least 4. Possibly more. Moving in tactical formation with proper spacing. These weren't farmers forced into service. These were professional soldiers. Experienced. Confident. They were hunting. Scout could hear them now. Not conversation, not carelessness. Just the unavoidable sounds of humans moving through jungle. Equipment shifting. Breathing. The whisper of fabric against vegetation. Footsteps that tried for silence but couldn't achieve it completely, because physics doesn't care about training. They were using the approach routes he'd predicted, the natural corridors, the paths of least resistance that tactical movement demands, exactly where he'd placed the traps. His heart hammered so hard he was certain the enemy could hear it. His breath came faster despite his efforts to control it. This was different from training, different from exercises. This was people trying to kill him, and he was about to find out if his Boy Scout project was genius or the stupidest decision of his short life. 40 meters. The lead elements would reach the first trap cluster in seconds. Scout couldn't see them, could only hear, could only imagine their positions based on sound, could only wait. Then it happened. A thrashing sound ripped through the darkness. Sudden, violent, wrong. The kind of sound that makes your hindbrain scream danger before your conscious mind processes what happened. A scream followed. Sharp. Cut off almost immediately. Not silenced by will, but by shock. The kind of noise a human makes when pain arrives so suddenly the body doesn't know how to respond. Then a wet sound. Impact. Weight hitting earth. The heavy thud of a body falling without any attempt to break the fall. Voices erupted in Vietnamese. Shouting. Multiple speakers. Words Scout didn't understand, but tones he recognized instantly. Confusion. Panic. The edge of fear that comes when the situation goes from controlled to chaos in a heartbeat. More thrashing. Movement scrambling in multiple directions. Someone trying to help. Someone trying to retreat. Someone trying to understand what just happened. The tight tactical formation disintegrating into individual survival instinct. Another impact. Heavier this time. A grunt of pain. Sustained. Not cut off. Someone conscious and aware and hurting badly. More shouting. The Vietnamese words coming faster. Overlapping. Orders maybe. Questions probably. The universal sound of a plan falling apart. The SASR patrol didn't move. Didn't fire. Didn't react beyond maintaining their positions and tracking the chaos by sound. The patrol leader's hand signal was clear. Hold. Wait. Let it develop. Don't compromise the position unless necessary. This was discipline at its highest level. Enemy soldiers meters away. Some wounded, some confused. Perfect targets. And the Australians held fire because revealing their position meant escalation, meant calling in their location, meant turning a reconnaissance mission into a firefight they might not survive. Let the trap work. Let the enemy panic. Let them make mistakes. A third impact. Lighter. Different angle based on the sound. Someone had tried to move and found another stake, or stumbled and fallen onto one. The chaos was creating more casualties. Fear causing mistakes, causing injuries. Then retreat. The sounds moving away. Hasty, desperate. The tight discipline gone. replaced by the primal need to get away from danger you don't understand. Voices still shouting but growing distant, crashing through vegetation, making noise that would carry for hundreds of meters, abandoning stealth for speed, the sounds of men dragging casualties, heavy, labored, multiple people struggling with dead weight. The kind of evacuation that happens under fire, except there was no fire. Just bamboo, just physics, just a trap they'd never expected. The patrol leader's hand came up again. Different signal. Hold position. No pursuit. Let them go. The mission was reconnaissance, not combat, not unless absolutely necessary. You don't chase a wounded enemy into darkness when you don't know how many more might be waiting. Minutes passed. The jungle slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Insects resuming their calls. Small animals moving again. The ambient sound that means no immediate threats. Nature's all-clear signal. But the SASR patrol remained frozen. Waited. Watched. Listened. Because experienced operators know that sometimes the enemy comes back. Sometimes they set up hasty ambushes hoping you'll pursue. Sometimes the retreat is bait. An hour passed. Then 2. The patrol leader finally signaled for a communications check. Whispered consultations. Status reports. Everyone okay. No injuries. No contact. Just the sounds they'd all heard and the questions nobody wanted to ask yet. Dawn came slowly. Gray light filtering through triple canopy in gradual stages. Darkness to deep shadow. Shadow to dim visibility. Dim to barely adequate. The jungle never gets bright. Just less dark. When visibility reached acceptable levels, the patrol leader signaled Scout forward. 2 others maintained security. 1 covered the approach. Scout and the patrol leader moved toward where the sounds had originated. They found the first trap 20 meters from their defensive position. Blood immediately visible on the bamboo. Fresh. Still wet. The stake had taken someone's center mass. The angle perfect. The penetration deep. Physics and sharpened bamboo doing what evolution designed thorns to do. Except scaled up. Weaponized. Lethal. They found the body another 10 meters away, where the VC had dragged him before abandoning the effort. A young man, maybe 20, maybe younger. It was hard to tell. Death had a way of erasing age along with everything else. He wore the black pajamas typical of VC, carried an AK-47, Chinese manufacture, well-maintained, ready to kill Australians. The bamboo stake had punched through his lower abdomen, entered left of center, exited through his lower back, the wound channel visible, the kind of injury that destroys organs and causes massive internal bleeding. He'd probably died within minutes, maybe in shock before pain fully registered, maybe aware the whole time. There was no way to know. His weapon lay 3 feet from his body, safety off, ready to fire. He'd been prepared for combat, just not the kind that came from the ground. Blood trails led away from the other 2 trap positions, heavy bleeding, the kind that paints vegetation, that leaves pools, that tells a story of severe trauma and desperate movement. Both casualties would need immediate medical attention. Surgery probably, blood transfusion definitely. All things they wouldn't get. Not out here. Not while moving through hostile jungle trying to evade contact. The patrol leader keyed his radio. Called in coordinates, reported the contact. Requested surveillance of exfiltration routes. A combined sweep launched 6 hours later. Coalition forces moving in coordinated patterns to cut off retreat. Standard procedure after enemy contact. They captured 2 VC soldiers 15 kilometers from the contact site. Both matched the blood trail patterns. Both had severe leg wounds. Bamboo punctures through calf and thigh. One had secondary injuries from falling. Possible fractured ribs. Possible internal bleeding. Both were barely conscious from blood loss and shock, and hours of forced movement through jungle that shows no mercy to the wounded. Interrogation was handled by intelligence specialists. Professional, methodical, following proper procedures. The prisoners confirmed they'd been part of a hunter team, 5 men, tasked specifically with locating and eliminating the Phantom unit. Intelligence indicated an SASR patrol was operating in the area. The VC command wanted it gone. They'd identified signs of an overnight position, found the defensive setup, planned a dawn probe, move in close, observe, attack if numbers favored them. Standard counter-reconnaissance tactics, professional military work. They'd expected claymore mines, expected rifles, expected the kind of defenses modern soldiers used. Electronic sensors maybe, tripwires connected to explosives, high-tech solutions to age-old problems. Nobody expects bamboo anymore. Nobody thinks about stakes and holes and primitive methods that belong to wars fought before gunpowder. The kind of traps that should be obsolete, should be curiosities in military museums, should be tactics that modern soldiers study historically, but never encounter. Except they worked. Killed one, wounded two, shattered a 5-man team, caused panic and chaos and retreat, all without firing a shot, all without revealing the SASR position. All because one soldier remembered old lessons everyone else had forgotten. Back at base 2 days later, Dingo found Scout cleaning his rifle, the ritual every soldier performs after missions, the meditation of disassembly and inspection and reassembly, the kind of work that occupies your hands while your mind processes everything you saw and did and survived. Dingo sat down without asking permission, didn't speak immediately, just stared at the jungle tree line visible beyond the base perimeter, watching it the way soldiers watch things that tried to kill them, with respect, with wariness, with the understanding that it's still out there and will try again. A full minute passed before he spoke. "I called you Boy Scout." Scout continued working, didn't look up. "I know." Meant it as an insult. "I know that too." Another silence. Dingo pulled out his own cleaning kit, started working on his weapon. The shared ritual, creating space for difficult words. Primitive doesn't mean ineffective. Scout nodded, still didn't look up. "No, it doesn't. The VC taught us that. Every day. Bamboo and patience and knowing the ground better than the enemy. They've been bleeding modern armies with old methods since the French. Since before that, probably. Yes. And we forgot. Got so focused on technology and firepower and sophisticated tactics that we forgot the basics still work. Maybe work better because nobody expects them anymore." Scout finally looked up, met Dingo's eyes. "It was just an idea. Could have failed. Probably should have. But it didn't. Worked exactly like you said it would. Saved our asses without us having to fire a shot. Kept our position secret. Let us complete the mission." Dingo paused, choosing words carefully. "That's the kind of thinking that wins wars, or at least keeps you alive in them." The patrol leader filed his report that evening. Detailed, professional. Recommended incorporating defensive trap systems into SASR doctrine for static overnight positions, especially in deep penetration missions, especially in areas with high enemy activity. The recommendation included technical specifications, placement guidelines, construction methods, everything needed to turn one soldier's improvisation into standard procedure. The recommendation moved up the chain of command. Got reviewed by officers who understood that good ideas come from anywhere. Got approved quietly, without fanfare, without any formal acknowledgement. The kind of tactical evolution that happens when something works and pride doesn't get in the way. Scout never heard anyone call him Boy Scout again, at least not as an insult. Some of the veterans started asking questions about angles, about placement, about material selection, about how to make modern soldiers remember lessons that predated radios and satellites and air support, because that's what the traps represented. Not technology, not advancement, just recognition that warfare has fundamentals, that certain principles transcend eras, that sometimes the oldest solutions work because everyone forgets to guard against them. The Viet Cong understood this, used bamboo and patience and intimate knowledge of terrain to bleed a superpower. Turned American firepower into a liability in close jungle where you couldn't see far enough to use it. Made helicopters and artillery and airstrikes irrelevant in fighting holes and tunnels. Proved that the side with simpler tools but better understanding of environment could compete with the side that had everything. The Australians learned, adapted, studied enemy methods and asked why they worked instead of just complaining that they shouldn't. Took techniques that had killed their own soldiers and figured out how to use them back. Turned the VC's advantages into shared knowledge. That's evolution in warfare. Not the side with better technology, the side that adapts faster. Scout figured it out in one night. Used knowledge from before the army taught him modern doctrine. Combined old skills with new understanding. created something that worked because it mixed past and present into solutions the enemy didn't predict. 3 VC soldiers paid the price for that lesson. 1 died on bamboo that cost nothing and took minutes to prepare. 2 more got captured because wounds slowed them down. A 5-man hunter team got broken by a method they should have recognized because they used it themselves. And a phantom unit learned that ghosts can leave traps even if they don't leave footprints, can kill without revealing themselves, can use the enemy's own tactics refined through the lens of professional training and operational understanding. Sometimes warfare moves forward, precision weapons and drones and cyber attacks. Other times it circles back to principles that worked 1,000 years ago and still work today. Sharp stakes, hidden positions, turning terrain into an ally. The trick is knowing which moment requires which method, when to use the radio and when to use the bamboo, when to call in air support and when to dig a hole with a stake at the bottom. Scout knew, trusted his judgment even when veterans mocked it, believed in old lessons even when modern doctrine said they were obsolete, built his traps while others built their pride, and survived to see the morning prove him right. That's the real lesson, not about traps, about trusting your training even when it differs from the crowd, about remembering that effective beats sophisticated every time, about understanding that the enemy respects results more than methods. The jungle remembers, still holds the blood from that night, still hides the stakes that worked when everything else was just theory, still teaches anyone willing to listen that simple doesn't mean weak. And somewhere in the Vietnamese bush, VC units tell stories about phantoms who don't just disappear, who leave presence behind, who remember old ways and use them with new efficiency. They still call the Australians phantoms, but now the name carries different weight. Not just ghosts, but ghosts with teeth, with memory, with the willingness to learn from anyone including their enemy. That's respect, earned in blood, measured in bodies, proven in the only laboratory that matters, combat. If this story earned your respect, hit that subscribe button and join us for more untold military history. Drop a like if the Boy Scout proved the veterans wrong. And comment below, what's the most underestimated tactic you've ever heard of? Let's discuss.